All right, recording started. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for coming and joining us for this amazing webinar that we are really excited to have. We're really happy to host today and to have with us this webinar in partnership with Beautiful Trouble. Nadine Bloch is the training director for Beautiful Trouble, and she's joining us today to speak about exciting things and what Beautiful Trouble is working and focusing on, and how we can learn more about campaigning and what has been conducted so far in regions. Hello, whoever is calling and joining. Hello, please mute yourself and write your names. And if you can write your names in the chat, where you are calling from, which region, and which country, that would be good for us. And a quick introduction about Nadine. We'll start with a quick introduction. So Nadine is an innovative artist. She's nonviolent action practitioner, political organizer, and direct action trainer, and a lot more and more than this. We're really thrilled to have you, Nadine, with us today to speak to us about the work that you have been doing. Nadine combines the principles and strategies of people power with creative use of the arts in cultural resistance and public protest. No. And her work has been featured. Hello. Yes, we can hear you. Sorry for that. Nadine's work has been featured nationally and locally in newspapers, magazines, and a lot of platforms. She's a contributor to the book Beautiful Trouble and Beautiful Rising, and we are many reflections on movement strategies from occupation to liberation, which she's going to speak about more about these books today. She's also the author of a special report called Education and Training in Nonviolent Resistance, and the co-author of SNAP, an action guide to synergizing nonviolent action and peace building. Again, as I was saying, we're really excited to have Nadine with us today. So thank you, Nadine, for joining. And I know we have been planning for this webinar for a long time. So finally, it's happening now. Again, just to say, I'm going to turn off my camera so we could have better connection. And we're turning Nadine's camera off in a few minutes. If you may, please send on the chat your names, the regions you are representing, and the countries you are calling from. That would be helpful. And apologies, we will not be able to go through one by one for the introduction, but we'll go through the names. And a special greeting to all of you, wherever you are calling from. I know some of you are calling at night, others it's still early in the morning, so we really appreciate it. This webinar is being recorded, and we're going to post it at the Innovation for Change platform in the coming week. Nadine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rasha. Thank you, all of the Innovation for Change folks who helped make this possible. And thanks to all of you for getting up early or staying up late, joining us in the middle of the day. Really happy to have a chance to share with you some of the work that we've done at Beautiful Trouble and to introduce our network to your network. That's really what it's about for us. And yeah, I'm calling in from outside of Washington, D.C. I've been doing as an activist, an educator, an organizer, working on creative resistance for more than 30 years now. I myself am an artist, a puppetista, and really dedicated to helping and facilitating strategic creative work so that we have much more effective social justice campaigns. And in particular, we find that this work is very effective for grassroots organizations, organizations with limited resources, and those who are in difficult circumstances in shrinking civil society spaces, in communities with rising authoritarianism and increasing threats. Being more creative and more and embracing a broader spectrum of response is really instrumental, critical in making our work actually successful. So really happy to be here and look forward to working with you in the future if that's possible, and or particularly having you use the resources that are all online right now for free and are online in multiple languages. So we'll go into a little bit more about that, but in general, and where you're from, your region and your country in the chat box by way of introduction, that would be great. I'm going to run through a slideshow really quickly so that we have a lot of time at the end for questions. I would also encourage people to type questions in as the presentation happens. So at the end of the presentation, we'll go back through the chat and look at the questions that have come in. You don't have to wait till the end, but you can wait till the end to put a question in or a comment or something you want to share with the group. That would be really great. So we're just going to start with Beautiful Trouble. So Beautiful Trouble, in fact, is started about, gosh, I can't even remember, 5 or 6 years ago with a book. And the particular book was written by 70 artist activists. And it took stories that people told about their world and their activist experiences and distilled them into lessons that we could use in other parts of the world and in other campaigns. We found that people's stories, when they assess them correctly, could be told as principles or theories, and certainly we could pull out the specific tactics that people use that could be effective in other places. And from that start, we started our jam sessions and our trainings, our in-person work. We have another book, Beautiful Rising, which is a specific book focused on Global South activism. And as I told some of you earlier, we also have a book we have a collection focusing on stories from the African continent. And that is in the final stages, getting prepared to be published. We also are really committed to making sure that you can access this no matter what your situation is electronically. So what you can see here is that we have a way that you can order a real book, and I'll show you in a minute. The books are in many languages. Beautiful Rising itself is online in Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, and English at the moment. And these two websites I'll just mention, the Beautiful Trouble and Beautiful Rising websites, are merging. And so pretty soon there'll just be one website under beautifultrouble.org. And we also recognize that some people don't have good internet access. So we have what we call a chat bot that you can interact with and download the specific stories, the tactics, the theories from the Beautiful Rising and Beautiful Trouble websites. We've actually also developed a card deck. You can see a picture of the upper right-hand corner of people playing a card game. Right now, we just completed or are still working on actually an Indiegogo campaign to fund that. And later I can show you some of the newly designed, really exciting strategic cards that can be used for everything from helping you develop a creative action to learning more about what has happened around the world, interestingly, or to actually do strategic planning with. So again, it's really about making things accessible. And that also has a really special piece on it. I can show you later, a QR code, where if you have a smartphone, you can look at the little code on the card and it will take you right to the web page for that particular theory or story. And therefore it's translated already into Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. So just a reminder for myself, these books are available in actually 7 languages in addition to English. And these are some of the covers. You can order them online, and you can also access, like I said, most of the information is online. In Creative Commons, you can use it with attribution. So because we're interested not in holding on to the information, but in making sure that people have access to it. And the community, this represents the collective wisdom of about, I'd say, 200 plus activists, artists, organizers from all over the world who participated in these open jam sessions and workshops to collect this information. We also have a way where if you have a story that you want to tell or a principle you want to share, you can submit it on the Beautiful Rising and Beautiful Trouble websites. I will mention that because of our transition to one website, response to those submissions might be pretty slow, and it will take us a while to get it up on the website. But it is there for you to interact with. So just so that's a bigger picture of the world of Beautiful Trouble, and we have people all over the world working on this. So the way the books and the websites are structured, you'll find things in categories. Again, we have people tell their stories, and from the stories, we distill out or pull out the tactics that worked, the principles that help you design these successful actions, the theories, right? These are the bigger picture ideas that we operate under that will also help us be more effective in our activist work. And then the methodologies are actually collections of strategic tools. And at the end of this little slideshow, we'll go really quickly into a couple of the tools. I'll just introduce you quickly to them. So I'm going to run really quickly through this. So everybody might recognize this strategic planning pyramid. And the key takeaway from here is not that you use this particular pyramid or process, which we do go into in some of the tools that we have, but that we understand that in order for tactics to be valuable and deliver on our goals and our vision and values, they need to be used within this framework. So we have to be clear about our goals and our mission before we do the tactics. Otherwise, it's, you know, somebody will say, oh, I'm going to make a giant puppet and everything's going to be great. I'm going to solve the problem of our election irregularities and blah, blah, blah. And it actually won't work unless you've already come up with a process for why the puppet is going to work on delivering on the goals around exposing what's happening with your elections, for example. So we're going to jump right into some of these ideas. I'm going to run really quickly. You'll see action logic is the name of a theory. In this picture, you might recognize or not. It's from the United States civil rights struggle. And you see young black and white students sitting at a lunch counter with people behind them pouring things on their heads and being mean to them because the young black and white students are breaking a law, an accepted practice where blacks and whites would be separate at the lunch counters, and the students were there to make sure that that was undone, that segregation was finished. And so if you were part of the United States then, or even now, you would see this picture and you would understand immediately what was happening. So this we call action logic. The fact that your action can make sense with one quick image. That's one example. Here's another example that we have to start as activists, making the invisible visible, whether it's an environmental issue like these are presented here, where someone is lighting their tap water on fire because of fracking that has put chemicals into the water. The problem wasn't visible until you held a match to the water. Or the problem of climate change. Here's an action that was done in the Arctic, showing the melting of the Arctic with a traditional picture of, you know, humanity made on the Arctic with big sheets of copper. It's a huge image, trying to bring home the problems of climate and the impacts of climate on humanity itself. Now, it's not always environmental that we're talking about problems that we have to make visible. Here's an example where in Spain, giant portraits of people who had been made homeless by irresponsible activities of the banking institutions were pasted on the outside of the banks that made them homeless, making the problem visible to the community. So often this is where we start as activists. We have to make the problem visible in order to take action. Another big one, and I know I'm talking to people from all over the world who have amazing cultural assets to use in their work. This is a picture from Estonia. There's a really fabulous movie called The Singing Revolution, if people want more history about how Estonia nonviolently resisted the Soviet takeover. And that community, that culture sings like no other culture. This is an example where the resistance needed to be communicated to people, and about a third of the population showed up at a big music festival, which is part of their community culture, and started singing their national anthem. And the Soviets could do little to control this. This wouldn't, of course, work in many other countries that don't have a singing culture like this, but it's a very powerful thing to use those backgrounds that you do have. And I will mention, I forgot to mention at the beginning, for those of you who share your email, and either with Rasha or in the chat box, I can send you specific resources, links to Beautiful Trouble resources, and links to things that I mentioned in this quick overview, like the Singing Revolution movie, and I can share that with you if you leave us your email. Now, here's an example from Canada, another kind of cultural asset. People might know that lots of Canadian winters are very snowy. So this is sculptures that were done on a river, and it was done to highlight the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it was sculptures because they often find missing and murdered Indigenous women thrown into the river. It's an issue that has been gaining more and more public recognition, although within the community it's been a problem for, of course, a long time. It was done with very clear media work. There were lots of stories in the press about this sculptural protest, and there were signs all along the river to point out the problem and to help move people to take action on this issue. So again, cultural assets could be things traditionally like singing or dancing or food, but it can also be your environment and things like cold winters and snow. This is a really great one that I'll go over very quickly. People might recognize Gandhi in the bottom right corner on the Salt March. A classic example of putting a community in what we call a decision dilemma. With, in this case, Gandhi and his Salt March followers were trying to mobilize a campaign to march to the sea to make salt, which was illegal in the British regime. And when they started marching from the ashram, there was just a small group of people. If the British actually crushed that small group of people violently, they would have had to do it violently because they were determined to march. They would expose how violent the regime truly was, even though they claimed that they weren't. And if they didn't crush this small group of people starting to walk to the sea, they faced a problem because the group kept growing. And in fact, that's what happened. Thousands of people ended up at the seaside making salt. So it put the British in a place where they couldn't win, whether they crushed the regime violently in the beginning and exposed how violent the regime was, or they let it continue. And then, of course, that was good for the protesters. The top one is a very interesting story about what we call an involuntary walkathon. And if there's anyone on the call who speaks German, it says, if only the Führer knew what you were doing. And in fact, in a small town in Germany, there were people who marched every year to the gravesite of a Nazi. And the community did not want this to happen anymore, but they couldn't figure out how to stop it. And so what they did is they started a walkathon, an involuntary walkathon, and pledged money for every meter that the people marched. They would donate to a group called Exit Deutschland, who was helping people leave the neo-Nazis and, give that up. And they made it look like a party, right? This is fun and pink and looks happy. And because they were encouraging people to march. So of course, the decision dilemma for the marchers, for the neo-fascists, was if they marched, all this money was being raised to help people leave their cult. If they didn't march, then the town won. So for a few years, they did continue to march, and lots of money was donated. And then after that, they stopped marching. So we call these decision dilemmas. People might recognize this next picture. Media hacking is the idea that you go where the media already is so that your activities are already covered by the media. And part of our hard work as activists and organizers is to get the media to cover our actions. So this is the 1968 Olympics. This is the Black Power salute. There were huge repercussions from this, but the pictures went around the world and are still really powerful today. Some of you might recognize some of these pictures. So we have two tactics that are called clandestine leafleting. One is currency hacking. On the bottom, you'll see currency hacking, a story from the Middle East region where people wrote on Israeli shekels, free Palestine. Now, one thing you know about money is that it goes everywhere and everybody has it. It's like a free leaflet. You should know that this is not a legal thing in many countries, but it is also a dispersed activity that's very low risk because it's very hard to determine who wrote on your money. In the United States now, there's a campaign going on where people have stamps and they stamp the money not to be used for bribes and things like this. So it's a very effective way to get messages out. And people may know from the region that Israel tried at one point to ban money that had been written on. They were 1 shekel notes. They were very inexpensive and it didn't affect the distribution of money in that way, but it got the message out very effectively. The upper picture is hard to see possibly, but it's ping pong balls flowing down the streets of Aleppo in Syria before the big activities happened, but when it was illegal to protest in mass groups. And the ping pong balls all had messages saying freedom and justice and resist. And it was a very effective way to help people understand that there was a live resistance community in a way that was much safer than going out and protesting and much more dispersed. So when we're in situations where we have very difficult circumstances, very controlled civil societies, we have to be very creative and think about dispersed mechanisms for getting our messages out, and of course, low risk mechanisms as much as possible until we're ready to be public and take higher risk. A classic picture here, guerrilla projection. This one happens to be in the United States at the International Hotel in Washington, D.C., but projections have become much more accessible. It's very easy now to get a little projector, a battery, and to go out on the street and quickly put a message up and quickly disappear if you need to. You also don't in any way harm the building. You can put it up very high. You can project from a safe place, let's say an apartment building across the street, if you're in an urban setting. So there's a lot of potential there. Really quickly about prefigurative intervention. This is kind of a fast way, a complicated way to talk about putting in place the future that you want now. The upper picture is people I think in the United Kingdom, actually, who are occupying a parking space. You can see they put grass down and they turned a parking space into a park because that's what they'd rather have. And in the lower picture, we have an example, a cartoon showing what a group of women did who worked in a building, and they wanted to have daycare in their building. And the boss, of course, did not want to give them the daycare. So what they did, they made an appointment with the boss, and they got all the women, and they took their children and their diapers and all of their things, and they went to the boss's office and set up their daycare in the boss's office, stayed there all day, changing diapers, doing everything, refusing to leave. And there they had convinced the boss to give them a daycare. And after that, they got their daycare. But they used what they wanted to have happen as the protest. Now, this one, pretty simple one, a creative petition delivery. Usually this is more of an interactive slideshow, but I'm sure you can tell what's happening. There's a picture of people in medical uniforms or in scrubs. It says Save Our NHS on the petition boxes, and you can maybe see that it's on a stretcher. People are bringing the petitions in as if they're on life support, and there's even an IV. And so the idea was petitions themselves might be not so exciting, but you can use the surrounding messages to help make it much more exciting. And in this case, this is also really good action logic from the beginning, right? You can see, even without knowing what this is from the National Health Service in the UK, but the idea was that we need to save our health service. It's on its last legs. Quickly, this is a human banner, so Tax the 1% is made with people on the beach, and you can, these days, you can do this easier from a tall building, or even use a drone on a balloon. We've seen that happen effectively. There's many kinds of banners, I'm sure, but this is one that could be a fun one to do. Okay, now I'm going to talk really quickly about two tools. I know we're running out of time. But the point, these two tools are in the Beautiful Trouble methodology set. One is called points of intervention, and you can see these are actual physical places where you might intervene on a campaign, or it could be a theoretical place. Like a point of assumption is where people are assuming things about your issue area. I'm not sure. I guess we should go through these. A point of production, for example, this is actually a factory where there's a protest happening. A point of destruction, you might recognize this picture from Papua New Guinea, blocking indigenous folks blocking a logging road where their forest is actually being destroyed. Consumption, this is a supermarket where there was a protest around workers' rights and people picking tomatoes. Points of decision, you can see Native Lands Rights Now. This is from Canada and their parliament. And a point of assumption, as I said, might be a theory. This is from a legalize gay rights, gay marriage protest. And you can see that people when we work on this, we have to make sure that people understand, for example, in the legalized marriage right, that people have rights no matter what how they present in the world. And so this is an assumption that we can work with. I'm also going to really quickly talk about Spectrum of Allies. And this is an incredibly powerful tool that can help you identify very specific people on the spectrum of the work that you're doing, which is really important when you're thinking about who is your potential community that you will move. And all of the tactics and ideas, the creative ideas we had earlier, would fit in somewhere on this tactic if you identified the right people, the correct people that you wanted to move. You would know then what correct tactic to use. And the reason why this is powerful, the superpower of this tool, is that we don't win our campaigns by moving our active opponents over to our side to become allies. We win our campaigns by shifting this spectrum. So we move the middles to passive allies and the passive allies to active allies. Because as you may know, in some of the research that we've done, all the nonviolent campaigns that mobilize 3.5% of their population into active participation were successful. And many were successful with even lower mobilization rates. 3.5% seems very low. I know in some countries it's still quite a lot of people, but it's way lower than what I originally assumed, which was that you had to mobilize more than half the people to win. And the way that we do it is by identifying very specifically who falls in these different pie slices, and then making sure that our methods of reaching them are moving them towards our side. So that can be a really example. And as I mentioned, here's a little story from that. In this fight for workers' rights, the farm workers who were picking the tomatoes, they identified that the tomatoes were being sold to places that were making food out of them. For example, in the United States, it was called the Taco Bell, which is a quick food place. And the people who mostly ate at Taco Bells were students. And so they identified the students as potential allies in the struggle. They often have a good sense of justice, they're young, they're easily reachable, and they will take action. And so they targeted the students to boycott Taco Bell. And this was extraordinarily effective in helping the workers gain a living wage. So that's an example of how it was used. I think we're going to stop there and ask for questions. We've gone through a lot of different ideas. And the most important thing maybe to take away is that Beautiful Troubles resources are available online. We really encourage you to use them, whether it's through the chat bot or whether it's by reaching out if you need more support. We definitely offer trainings and workshops. We're really interested in collaborations and partnerships. We have people all over the world we have people working all over the world that are in our network and are happy to organize with you, and happy to hear your stories if you would like to contribute them. Another really interesting piece that we'll be launching soon is what we call the GURU, the Get Up, Rise Up Small Action Grants. And we are going to be having grants for $500 to $1,000 available, particularly to communities that are underfunded traditionally, and that are looking to have some small support for direct action. And as I said, if you put your emails in the chat box, or if you send them to Rasha and she sends them to me, I'll send specific. So thank you so much. I think I'll stop. So I stop my share now?
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. Thank you so much. Let me turn on the camera for both me and you, Nadine. Thank you. This definitely moved me. Like, I feel that I want to go now, right now, and do a campaign. So thank you. That was, I know it was it was short, and we definitely want to hear more and read more, but definitely a great start. I know we still have like 10 more minutes, so we can open the space for some questions. I see one of the questions from the I4C colleagues, actually. Can I suspect this is Gerardo? Gerardo's saying, maybe it's Gerardo, he loved the spectrum of allies, and if we can use it, shall we put, like, it's a beautiful trouble?
Yeah, so if there are two places I'll send you information on about Spectrum of Allies. One is definitely look at the Beautiful Trouble site. There's two different graphics, and there's a how to use the Spectrum of Allies in the Beautiful Rising site under methodologies. The second thing is I will link you to another publication I'm part of called the Synergizing Nonviolent Action in Peace Building, something I co-wrote with Lisa Shirk at the United States Institutes of Peace recently. And there is also an in-depth how to use the Spectrum of Allies tool in that methodology, that collection of materials. And that's available for free from the USIP as well. So the Beautiful Trouble work is all Creative Commons. So definitely use it, and you should definitely attribute it. And then people will, that's how Creative Commons works.
Thank you so much. And the question was from Kara, my mistake. Hi, Kara. Any other questions? Who's there? Questions.
Or if anybody wants to share stories about their experiences, if they have principles that they want to ask, or if you have an example for a principle from your work. I mean, we do a lot of work on shrinking civil society space and the rise of authoritarianism globally. I know that you are all working on that. And I mean, most important to us is for people to use these tools. And actually, I guess people could see my, I'll show you. These are the cards that we've just developed that are going to be accessible soon to the general public. These are the draft cards, but they're very great tools for effective planning, whatever, and also for fun, of course. So if you're interested in that, the Indiegogo campaign is still actually happening as well. So there are 99 cards of specific actions, even cards about risk taking and things like that. They're very useful in campaign settings. And I think I showed people the books already. But this particular thing, I'll just point out, we're really excited about the card decks because of this little design here, the QR codes. Because most smartphones these days, when you show them the QR code, you don't need to download anything. They take you right to the page. So for example, do the media's work for them. If you click on this, you would go to the page, and on Beautiful Rising, you could get it in Arabic, Portuguese, Spanish, or English, the whole write-up, even while you're playing the game. So it's quite useful.
Brilliant, brilliant. So any stories here? Oh.
I have a quick question, if I can.
Sure, Safia.
So with the cards, Nadine, is it used in the initial, the design aspect of the campaigns? Is that how you get everybody around a particular cause, a particular strategy to use? Because like there's an issue and everyone knows there's an issue, but sometimes people have different ideas on how to address that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have about 10 games you can play with the cards right now, and we're still working on more. So certainly the easy games, the quick games, are just go and pick a card and use it as a sort of a fortune telling device. Even like maybe you're trying to think, what should we do? You pick one card. Oh, look, I picked Cacerolazo, noise making protest. Could we use that? What is that? How does that relate to our campaign, right? That's one way to do it. Very simple. Another way is to do all the way to a full action campaign planning process of helping you design your vision and values, then helping you refine your mission, and then, of course, identifying your goals. I mean, there are the methodologies in here include things like SWOT analysis, and I know some of you probably use things like the SWOT analysis, but my guess is you use them in a way that is not actually that helpful for the campaign development. But the SWOT matrix, if you look it up, the way we use it has actually 8 boxes rather than 4 boxes. You're not just listing your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but you're looking at the scenarios that happen when you merge your strengths and your opportunities, your strengths and your threats. So this can be really effective. And a number of these other methodologies can be very effective in a full-blown strategic planning process. So you can use the game cards in many different ways. Yeah.
We have one more question from Kara. Nadine, if you can read it.
Yeah, I can say it out loud. Sorry, my microphone should be working. Nadine, really great. I'm sorry I came in late. I bounced from another meeting, but I'm glad I got to hear the second part of your presentation. I'm super interested in, and this has come up quite a bit in our network, that just as civil society is changing its ways of protesting, nonviolent resistance, civic activism and engagement, well, so are the oppressive regimes, right? And so the thing, I've been really obsessed with what's happening in Hong Kong, right? And the protests there. And the fact now that the Chinese government has like very strategically chosen to say to the businesses, which are hiring many of these protesters, has said, you know, if you have people within your business who are protesting, well, we're not going to do business with you anymore, right? So China is really using this like money card, not in like what we've seen in the past from oppressive regimes where they just directly confront protesters, right? But it's just like using the market values, right? That connection with Hong Kong companies to stifle protests and punish protesters, right? So I'm wondering if you're seeing what kinds of trends you're seeing. Like to me, that was like jaw dropping. I was like, I have not seen that before, and I have no idea how protesters at this point are going to respond to that, because one way to really choke protests is to say, well, you're not going to have money for food because you're not going to have a job.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think this is long-standing. There may be, it's a slightly different upgraded format, but we have seen through history that economics crush both protests and regimes, right? And I do think that that's really important. I do think the bigger picture, and I know you're aware of this, is how we see regimes now using surveillance, how we see technology being used to impact people's activities, and we need to be way more creative. And people are being way more creative about how they deal with it, whether it's putting their cell phones in microwaves or in refrigerators while they're talking, you know, turning off, being much more careful about their media presence, using front groups, you know, public facing front individuals who aren't involved in actually the actions, and making sure that there's a difference between those people and the people who are carrying things out. So there's a lot of things that have been happening for a long time, and then there's also developments that we have to face because, yeah, the regimes also adjust to what they're doing. And as far as this market thing goes, Hong Kong's a really interesting example, or really difficult example, both, because of the connection to mainland China. And when we talk about that 3.5%, remember that of the campaigns that are effective. And for people who don't know, that comes from Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan's work and Why Civil Resistance Works. And their findings that nonviolent campaigns were twice as effective as violent campaigns. And part of the reason is because of the sheer numbers of nonviolent campaigns. And I would say that is also one of the critical factors, even resisting in Hong Kong, where you have this incredible mass of people on Hong Kong, but the percentage of mainland China of Hong Kong is minuscule, right? And so when we think about how Hong Kong could win, there's a difficulty here because they're taking on potentially two layers, the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government. And that is a whole nother thing. And so I'm not an expert in this particular realm, and it seems to me that there needs to be an incredible support network built on the island itself, right, around Hong Kong resistance. And one of our challenges as activists has always been how to self-sustain, right? And one of the reasons why labor unions, for example, charge dues or make people pay into their unions, and one of the reasons why they've been able to sustain themselves in many parts of the world is because they have a self-sustaining economic way of doing business, right? People pay dues into it. Or in some examples, you could look in places where there are communities, like in Brazil, where there's a land-based movement that actually, you know, occupies and farms land to support their activities. So there are really, this is a really tough one, and a really one that people have wrestled with all over the world, looking at how do we both and it's really important that we do this. And sometimes activist movements don't monitor the regimes and their change in policies or their change in tactics. But when we monitor it and we figure out what to do, then perhaps the next step is for community support to realize that the employers in Hong Kong need to continue to employ people who are involved in the protests, or need to be able to make sure that they have a cooperative agreement with other people, like, you know, the established cooperative Mondragon in Spain, so that you build up the ability of this economic structure to operate outside of Chinese repression. So these are not simple things, but there are ways of thinking about it. And I think that we see that whenever regimes can punish people, they will do it. And they have learned also, like you said, if they do massive crackdowns, the sympathies of the people watching are often with the protesters. And so it backfires against the regime and more people turn out to protest. So they're being smart about that. Great.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadine. I see there was a question, but Kara helped with this. Thank you, Kara. I think we can wrap up if there's no other question or any other comment. Safia, do you have any last minute thing?
I just wanted to share that if you registered for this webinar, and we have your email addresses, we'll share the resources Nadine mentioned in the beginning, also a recording of this presentation and her PowerPoint. Yeah, so that's it. If you haven't shared your email address, don't worry. If it's not in the chat, if you registered for the event, we have your information.
Okay. Thank you, Safia. So please send your email addresses. Nadine, another question from Tamia. So two questions, actually. The first one was about the people you mentioned about why civil resistance work. So if you can repeat the names of these two people, and then, thank you. And the second question, which is Tamia also would like to know more about how to support young people to mobilize. Young people ages 14 to 16.
Yeah, this is great. I do a lot of work with youth, and we do all over the world, in fact. One of the benefits of working in a creative way, I mean, not only do we support creative action, but we facilitate in a creative way. I would never actually, we don't lecture people. We work with a popular education belief that everybody brings stuff in and it's all experiential. So a lot of the tools and stories from Beautiful Trouble are useful, particularly with youth. If you look, we have a study guide. I forgot about that. That's available for free on the Beautiful Trouble site. And in the study guide, there are 2 or 3 pages called Beyond the Page exercises. And they're about creative ways to train and teach and work with youth. So even in, from role plays to snowball fights, theoretical snowball fights with paper, and other things like that, fun games to particularly useful with youth, but also, with adults, we do a lot of really boring things with people that are not inspirational. So we have a big commitment to not only highlighting the activities and making them more creative, but how we work together in creative ways. And there are many stories in the Beautiful Trouble and Beautiful Rising collection from youth-led resistance. We find, of course, that the people, I would say, people sort of on the outside of society, people who are not considered like, the middle-aged drivers of economics and politics, those folks, whether they're artists or activists or youth, are often, and women, low-income folks are often the leaders of change and the visionaries of what could be different. Yeah, I would say there's some specific tools in there that would be useful. And of course, these stories are great. And there's a lot of stories, particularly there's a great story around school resistance in the Beautiful Rising book as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadine. I don't see any other questions, and I think our time is almost up. Thank you, Tamia. Thank you, everyone. Nadine, special thanks to you for being here with us today in this webinar, and we're really excited to build on this for further partnerships and hopefully more work together between Innovation for Change Network and Beautiful Trouble Network around the world. Just a reminder, so these resources are available in 7 languages. Everything that Nadine talked about is recorded. We're going to post it in the platform and soon in next week. And then please check the resources, 7 languages. That means the language you speak is probably is listed there. So that makes it more handy, more useful, and we are here to answer any questions. And hopefully we'll have more work together. Nadine.
Thank you so much. And yeah, definitely the materials are out there. We're building our community and connecting people locally. There may be some folks already using Beautiful Trouble tools or trainers in your region that we could connect you with. So thank you very much for hosting this, and look forward to hearing from you all at some point.
Likewise, likewise. Thank you everyone for calling from different parts of the world. Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.
Okay.